You do that
See,
again.
this is what the live stream will do.
Okay, it just takes a little bit to get to you.
Then we wait for it to turn on and then we turn this on mute.
You do that again.
Is that mute? Yeah.
Okay, are we good to go? Great. Well, thank you all so much for making time this afternoon for the subcommittee. It's exciting to see everyone and have everyone here. We'll have a little bit of a overview about what today's meeting is going to be about, kind of the structure, and then we'll have roll call, and then we'll get into the two subcommittees that we've put together. So, okay, into roll call. Jasmine Wilder. I think we saw Jasmine. Jasmine, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm present.
Okay, how are you?
Good.
Good. Okay, Mo Mitchell. We saw Mo.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
Hello. Carolyn Peacock Biggs.
Here.
And her wonderful cat.
Yeah, Tina's here too. See? Oh no.
Erin Mayer. I think Erin had said that she may be late if she's able to make it today.
She's is she? Yeah, no.
Cameron Fisher. I think similarly, I'm following up with Cameron. And Linda Long. Linda is here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I am.
Hi, Linda.
Hey.
Okay, so this is a recap from our meeting at the end of Human Rights and Equity Commission. We talked about the DEIA work plan that members of HREC had presented to City Council. It is to create that work plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and advise the City Council on implementation, progress, and updates to the plan. And then we know from there we've got the four different sections of subcommittees. And because so many of you were interested in both developing an equity framework and operationalizing equity, and because of the likely intersectionality and overlap between the two, I've condensed it so that it's easier for us to make meetings for just like one instead of two separate meetings. And if there's information we want to share, it's just going to be, I think, a lot easier and streamlined as we work between those. But absolutely, I'm open to feedback if you think this should be split up, or if there are times when maybe some members want to move into operationalizing equity more so than developing the framework, and we can monitor that as we go. So thank you all so much for volunteering to be part of this. I think it's going to be a huge part of what we know is the HREC strategic plan as we move into making these actionable goals for the rest of the year. Let's see. So Manoj had submitted some questions for all of us to consider as we move through these framework issues. But I really wanted to open it up just for the commissioners to talk about what they see and what they envision, what are their goals when you're coming up with developing an equity framework. And then we can get to Manoj's questions. But really, it's just an opportunity for, us to kind of figure out how are we defining it? What does it look like? Are we thinking that it's going to be like a piece of paper? Are we thinking it's going to be a little bit more in depth? Who's interested in specifics on the framework, about research, things like that. So really just open it up to commissioners to share their thoughts on this specific prong. And anyone feel free to jump in and unmute and say anything you like.
All right, so I guess I'll start. I don't know, just jump in, and this conversation is going to go on and then into so much depth. I guess I would start by just really thinking about focusing on making setting up the philosophy, but then making sure that, moving right away into actionable items covering across categories. Maybe I spoke too soon. I don't know. That's probably obvious. I just want to make sure that all the way through the process, all of our points are actually actionable.
Mhm. That's a really good point, Linda. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by the philosophy of this particular framework?
So I think anytime you start with a framework, it starts with questions, right? So what are we actually trying to get at? So you set up the thesis first. I mean, if you're trying to make for example, if you just want to say our goal is to make a beautiful world in Bend, well, that's great to start there, and it needs to start somewhere that large. But then breaking it down into elements and then making each element actionable is, I think if we move through the discussions with that sort of trajectory in mind, rather than getting stuck on in the big picture.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Definitely. I love that. Break down into elements to make each element actionable. I think that's a great place to join.
My favorite quote, and I used to have this when I had an office, I used to have this on my wall in my office. And it said, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time.
Mm.
So.
Okay. Thank you, Linda, for that. That's a great way to look at what lays ahead for this. Anybody else want to jump into thoughts or definitions or scope of work considerations for the developing an equity framework?
Okay, I can chime in.
Yeah, great, Carolyn.
When I think about what I consider as a goal for what I'd like to see in this particular part of the process is the impact of humanities. To go back to the situation with the houseless population that we're dealing with here, there's always processes, well, so far since I've been here, I've seen processes that are not as humane as they would need to be from a basic standpoint. I can understand that that things have to be done for the city in order to keep us safe and to cut down on different things. But there should be a way to consider humanities while making decisions and allow us an opportunity to try to reach the same goal that you're looking for, but in a way that doesn't deprive anybody or the least amount of pain possible for the general population. And just like she said, to be able to make a framework that is doable and something that you could say, okay, I was a part of this because it started out to be this massive thing and we chopped it down to this doable thing and here it's done. I'd like to be able to see some type of conclusion on something. I'd rather see 3 things done well than 7 things just talked about.
That's a great consideration, Carolyn. And I think specifically as we look at these 2 different elements, like both you and Linda have said, like coming up with actionable items that potentially we could conclude within the 2023 year, but then look at maybe potentially bigger goals or larger, a little bit more abstract goals that can be included as we figure out what City Council's next goal setting kind of comes up with to align with that. But I think it's true. If we are able to, during our December meeting, look back and say, like, these are the things that we were able to tangibly accomplish as HREC, that'd be a great place to be, I think. So yeah, absolutely. Those kind of SMART goals.
I think, let me just add to that if I could, that the language around that I think is probably like phase development. So, because we know, all of us, every single one, just even intuitively, that building a framework doesn't mean it's going to fix the problem. So we need a way for it to move forward with different players in a different time, 6 months, 2 years, or 3 years, 5 years from now. So I love what Carolyn is saying about, we need to look at something we can do in a year, But we also need to look at what we need to accomplish in 3 years and 5 years, and make that commensurate with the development that from data we know is going to happen in Bend.
Definitely. Thank you, Linda. Mo or Jasmine, anything on this particular point that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I guess I have some thoughts. Jasmine, are you sitting on anything? Do you want to go first, or?
My only thought would just be, I'm like brainstorming about ideas of how to like basically go through each department to know what the equity needs are, first of all. And then my next thing would be to just like be looking at other cities and other tools that already exist. So I guess that's where we start.
Mhm.
And that's all I really have to contribute.
Thanks, Jasmine. That's great. Yeah, definitely what similarly sized and positioned cities are doing would be a great place to start with our research. And I think we've got time a little bit later to think about what research we want to jump into. So that definitely is a great consideration. Mo, back to you.
Yeah, well, a few thoughts. I think one of the best ways to create a framework is to ask ourselves over and over again, whose comfort are we prioritizing? As just a question that we always ask, like in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. Because if we stay, in my experience, if we stay with that question and we live into the question, then inevitably the framework shifts to prioritizing non-dominant culture, which will create more belonging for everybody, not just those who historically have power. So I'd really like to see that built into the framework. My other thought is frameworks are really cool and they're limited. And so I guess my biggest concern is, how does this create accountability? Having worked previously in governmental systems, there's just a lack in accountability. There's a lot of like goal setting and a lot of talk about equity, but there's not a lot of follow through and with regards to accountability. So the thoughts I have are, how do we build in equity audits into the city? And how do those equity audits actually have teeth or power? And so, for example, we're looking at one specific department and it goes through an audit that we create or framework. And then we find that the individuals in leadership in that department aren't following through. When do they lose their job for not doing what they're supposed to be doing? And I say that coming from a place of just watching how accountability doesn't happen. And in order to have accountability, you have to have people on your team who are committed to the framework and the plan, and or at least like, we'll do it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems at the City of Bend, is that there's a lot of well-intentioned folks who want to see certain things happen, but there's no accountability and nothing changes. And so if it means that the equity framework creates a structure and environment where like kind of shit or get off the pot, frankly, like if the systems don't hold the people within the system accountable, then why are we even doing it? Like, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
If this framework doesn't hold city council accountable to this goal setting, which equity is at the middle of that, what's the point? And so I have a lot of feelings about that.
Okay.
And I'd like to see how we can create a structure with a lot of accountability and what that might look like. And I like the idea, Jasmine, of like looking at other city governments to see what people are doing, but I'd also really like to see us look not just in the state of Oregon. I'd like to look in also in more diverse communities, and communities with in cities maybe with greater access to certain knowledge or lived experience, rather than just in the state, because the state has, pretty problematic history as well. So
Yeah,
those are my
definitely.
thoughts.
That's great. Definitely getting a diverse kind of research pool of places. Do you mind, Mo, would you mind just diving into accountability a little bit further? Like, do you have any outside of the broad definition of like making sure that individuals, departments are held accountable to this framework? Do you have any idea about like, what does that mean when we say systems are held accountable specifically? Is that its own process?
Like, here's an example. So before the camping code was enacted, there's a form that's used that the city manager uses, that he gets filled out by other people in the city, in addition to the police officers who get called into houseless campsites or survival sheltering sites. And this form gets filled out, and there's like a ranking, like 1 through 5, but 1's not defined and 5's not defined. And the form is just riddled with bias. And that's the form that's used for the city manager then to enact his city manager power to then decide for a camp to be removed. So this was before the camping code, but I'm pretty sure that this form is still in existence and likely still being used. So what looks like just a governmental form that gets filed away is actually a really powerful and oppressive tool that oppresses really vulnerable people based on who's filling it out, what scoring is. Like, I think that's where an audit needs to come in, like literally an audit, an equity audit of like when the city's addressing specific issues around equity with like houselessness, like you have to look at every form that you use to make this decision and ask yourself, whose comfort are we prioritizing and who's filling out this form and what's their training, what's, like, I think there's just so much room for things to look like equities in action and happening, but it's actually a lot of bias and internalized oppression or systemic oppression happening. So like, I'm just curious about all the paperwork, frankly, that's used to back up the city's decisions and who's filling it out.
Yeah.
Because why are they filling it out, and how come HREC isn't filling it out, or the city's director of equity, how come that person isn't filling it out?
I think certainly when we're thinking about that kind of framework, the applicability and the ease and able to like run something through, that's definitely a great consideration, because is it something that we can easily look at? Like, I think that the tool that's ultimately created is going to have to really answer questions like you're saying, that prioritize and figure out whose comfort we are prioritizing, and then also figuring out what we can do if we identify that potentially there is bias or there is language or the impact is significant. So
what are the consequences of it? Like, if people can't follow through with the equity, what are the consequences of that? Like, I'm frankly sort of like, yes, let's educate, let's call people in, let's teach. And then there's a certain point when systems, like if people continue to sort of resist that, then like there should be consequences within, in my opinion.
Okay. So, and okay, this is.
And then putting whoever's the director of equity, is that you, Cassandra? Like, I don't even know who that is.
No, so yeah, so they just posted, the City of Bend has just posted through Workplace Change is the consultant firm that the equity and inclusion director role for the City of Bend is available on open right now. So that's a vacant position that ultimately I will be working for and under. So that is obviously going to be somebody that we're working closely with, and they'll have great proximity to HREC as well. So definitely things to consider as it continues to grow, definitely. So thank you, Mo, for those thoughts. Yeah. I really appreciate everybody having these kinds of conversations, because I think in order to really know what we can do, we have to, for our own purposes, define what it is and figure out like what exactly HREC is looking to do. So that's great. What about for operationalizing equity? Anyone have any thoughts or additional pieces, or is what you said applicable to operationalizing equity as well? I'm guessing from the quiet that it's probably similar feedback for this as well. And that's, again, if that's okay with you all, that's the reason that these two were put together, because there is so much overlap between what the two roles will have. Yeah.
And that's a very difficult question.
Mhm.
I mean, you got to think 16 times before you even try to answer that question, right? So, I guess where I would start with it is, let's go from just the idea of establishing a system or a process for accountability, right? So there is a flip side to that conversation, which is the incentive side, right? And it's a question whether or not, in this context, accountability accountability and incentives, they might be like cousins in this context, right? Because first and foremost, we want to create an environment where doing the right thing is the easiest and most productive and most profit creating situation for all of us, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what Mo was saying, and accountability is like a core concern, right? But I'm wondering, in this context, we ought to consider also incentives. And when when this conversation becomes larger in a community, they're questioning and asking what are the incentives to this kind of behavior modification framework.
Yeah, definitely, Linda. That is really true. And I appreciate you all jumping into these questions, because it is a big undertaking just to kind of start somewhere. So thank you for jumping in, and we'll get into these following ones are from developed from Noj, and he had just said if they help us kind of really define what it is that we're doing. And I've got the questions laid out for both of the two, developing an equity framework and then operationalizing equity. So if anybody wants to jump in with either of these, there's 4 questions for each of it. And the first one is, who is your focus areas, primary and possibly secondary target audience? Be specific. So specific to developing an equity framework, who is the focus areas, primary target audience?
I'll just throw this down as one card, and that would be the NIMBY community. They're not in my backyard community.
Okay.
We want to fix homelessness, but we don't want to be impacted by any of those solutions. Community.
Okay. Do we feel that part of the focus areas primary target audience might be the applicability to the city of Bend, if this is a framework that we're having utilized by city departments?
Here's what I'm thinking. As far as the focus areas, wouldn't it be, not saying easier, wouldn't it be a situation where if they have concerns, that would be the place that needs to Band-Aid versus us coming up with our own focus areas? What are their top 3? Let's say if it's housing or affordable housing, rental property issues, police, anything like that, whatever their top 3 concerns that keep them up at night, that's probably what we want to see if we could help with, for starters, because we got to give them something since we're going, here's what we want to see.
Yes. Yeah. Is the group thinking that this equity framework is like a piece of paper that each department runs through when they're making decisions with policy development or any kind of decision-making process, or any ideas about if it's a larger expanded framework, or there's no right answer here. We're just really brainstorming and trying to figure out like what exactly does it look like, who is using this tool, who's the primary target audience, and throw anything out. Yeah.
I think it should be like, I think it should be in everything. Like, and you know, like if city council tasks city staff with looking into doing some research and development around like, you know, constructing housing or like parking or like whatever, like all the things. I think it's a really dangerous idea to think that city is just like water, sewer, and like streets, you know, like it's that I think it should be in every department. And, you know, like when they ask the legal team to investigate the legality of certain things, where is the equity sort of framework that the legal team is having to embody and place into this? Right, in my experience, when council has an idea or a goal and wants city staff to look into something, there's very little discussion. There's sometimes talk about equity, but there's no framework to live into to guide people how to do that. There's no plan. There's no step. It's just a word. So it should be in everything, because if the center of your city goals is equity, then it is in everything.
Definitely.
I like to think about this like a roadmap, as if we're creating a roadmap. Right? Because I mean, so because that concept involves connectivity to me. So you know, part of the tragedy of Oregon that I see, and this is from someone who came here just 3 years ago, didn't know much about Oregon, is I see a lot of silos, like a mind-boggling level of silos, most of which don't really talk to each other. So if I can think about this like a roadmap, then it would tend to work in pieces for certain situations and in certain contexts in certain locations. So, for example, if we wrote a common roadmap for the police department and for the sanitation department and for whatever, pick one, right? It would have to be a framework that would fit into the vast differences of those organizations, right? So so that's why I'm thinking like of it as a roadmap. That's what I'm trying to do. That's the easiest way for me to wrap my head around it.
Well, and I think it's helpful too, Linda, because it means we're just, you know, forward progress as we move forward is just taking us to our destination of where we want to go. So there's comfort in having a roadmap and figuring out what it is we want to do. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Another key word, and we use this word in Minneapolis, St. Paul, when we wrote, I was working for the Metropolitan Council of I can't even talk. The Metropolitan Council, right? A planning agency for the 7-county area in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And they wrote what they called a blueprint 2030. And it was they didn't call it roadmap, but it was one. And it involved a fascinating and ginormous effort for public input, even including like a monopoly like game for zoning issues and that kind of stuff. But so I like the word blueprint as well, because that implies a structure and organized by, you know,
Definitely.
like by category, and then you can break it down into detail.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on a primary target audience? What specific features, components, services do you envision being a part of your focus area when it's live? Any feedback on those 2 questions? If not, I'll move on to the next 2 Manoj had prepared. So the next one is similarly, what do you envision as being the overall process your target audience would experience with your focus area available to them? In other words, what will they see and do? So I guess this is another area of where we'd be looking. Oh, and I see actually Joanne has her hand raised and want to make sure that we get to Joanne. Hey, Joanne, thanks for joining us.
1 second. I think she's actually.
Lisa is working on getting you unmuted.
Oh, there's 2 attending. Do you know this person? There she is.
You should be able to, Joanne, now.
Can you bring up your attendee? Because that's showing.
Nope. Joanne, can you hear us?
She's here now.
Yes, I can. Thank you. Good.
Of course.
Sorry for my tardiness. I appreciate the opportunity to join in. I was just listening to Linda, and I think Portland has a roadmap, more or less. So one thing I remember is that they have 3 circles, so it's more visual. Actually, Lisa, I'm gonna share screen real quick if that's okay. Because I wanted to share the opposite of a roadmap.
Okay. Right now, Cassandra's gonna be removing her. She's sharing screen right now. Okay, you have the ability now.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that like a variety of tools is useful because it allows us to engage where we're at, and we process information in different ways. Here is a little sample form from the Management Center, which is basically a great resource for anyone that is running an organization, because they have a lot of templates. And the idea with this is that for every project that the city takes on, there is a set of documents and criteria that they have to submit to supervisors to get approved, right? And so this is a sort of framework that each department or director could tailor to their work, while keeping in mind equity markers that we are trying to be consistent across the whole institution, right? So for example, right, how are we building relationships, right? Are we being transactional, or are we being intentional and long-term? And how are we, being mindful, right, of power imbalances, right? And how are we giving agency to the community to feel like they're equal stakeholders in projects, right? And not in a negative way, like going with a lawsuit, but rather proactively in the design of projects and whatnot. So staff development and check-ins, right? That's another way in which we can consistently incorporate equity markers where, we know that we are growing as people too. So this is an opportunity for us to grow in our skills, right? Then I think one more. Well, how do we solve problems, right? When faced with issues, how are we addressing those to make sure not only that we are meeting the needs of the community, but also, the needs of the individual. We know that even great organizations like the city of Bend, can at times overwork their employees if they're not mindful of how we treat and plan, right? So this is a way, to have that internal lens. So that's just all I wanted to share. So just to like give an idea how would like a very structured thing would look like.
Mhm.
And the idea is that, it's all available. And I think that we see like a smart strategy is using both, using multiple
Mhm.
ways to engage. All right.
Thank you, Joanne. So that's that document from the Management Center is something that we can look at, or do you want to send that to me and I can share it out to the whole group? What do you feel best with? Just as a template or an idea to get the juices flowing, as it were, to dive in.
I think that is best if I share with you and you share
Okay.
with everybody, so it's uniform, because I will hate to lose one email.
That sounds good.
If we lose one email, we can say, oh, it was Cassandra.
That's some built-in accountability. Oh, Joanne, that's funny. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Thank you for that, Joanne.
Just let me know.
This is the one. Okay, so these are the other questions that Manoj had for this subject. What do you envision as being the overall process your target audience would experience with your focus area available to them? What will they see and do? And then also, what resources or partners do you envision are required to build out our focus area and also to launch and maintain, right? So these are pretty big questions. So if anyone wants to jump in, have any thoughts at all during this time, that would be great. Just looking for time considerations, it's 1:39, and I did have a whole other set of slides with the same questions for operationalizing equity, but I think there's a lot of overlap. So all of the conversation is going to be helpful. So any thoughts on either of these questions about like what our target audience will see and do? Kind of like, are they taking the piece of paper, like Joanne's saying, potentially like the Management Center? Are we applying that to our everyday work? Are they applying it to any city process that comes up over someone's desk or paperwork, or, like what do we envision it? What does it look like, and how do we maintain it?
I kind of think that these are questions that are gonna find answers in the process that we're diving into over the course of this project. So, it's kind of hard to come up with a list of partners right now in my head. Because I already know that list of resources and partners is too huge to keep in my head. So I'm just thinking this is a question that I'd be more educated, better able to answer as we go through this process.
Definitely.
Right. It's good to see the question right now, is what I'm saying. And this is what this process is all about, is to come up with these answers.
Yeah, perfect, Linda.
As
I think
far
that's
as like answering the question right now, I'm unprepared.
No, I think that's great feedback. And even if we move into the work, or however you all want to work and move into the work, with these questions at the forefront of your mind as you find solutions or draft solutions, like that's great. It doesn't, these are just to kind of get the conversation started. So that's, I appreciate that, Linda. Thank you. Anybody else have?
Jasmine?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I really agree that in process is like where we're gonna come up with most of these resources and partners. But some things that just are on my mind that I would imagine would be resources or partners would be one, and this is a comment that actually ties back into accountability, which was an early conversation from Mo, is that this framework, once it's completed and we're asking for implementation, there really needs to be buy-in from city leadership. So they need to really partner with the equity framework. And that's, city manager and and then I feel like it has to be led by the director and the Department of Equity for implementation. And then there needs to be like, a culture shift or a precedent set for when implementation is happening. That I know in the past, our equity director had a lot of pushback from other directors about equity initiatives, which makes no sense, as far as the city really like leaning itself into wanting to make changes and make strategic changes and investing in an equity director, but then having other directors in with completely different focuses feeling like they can push back against that doesn't make any sense. There has to be like a clear line drawn that comes from city leadership that sets up a real collective effort and understanding that that everyone is going to be in sync. So that's a huge partner, just basically city leadership. The other thing is, when I think about equity framework, I really would want to be applied to vendors and folks the city chooses to work with. So like loosely, like I would imagine it would be anything where there's like strong, financial contributions or financial investment or even endorsement, from the city. I think that's when that kind of goes into play. Yeah, I think that's all I have so far for that.
That's great, Jasmine. Thank you for that. I think it's true. I think making sure that we're on the same page with city leadership, and we do have that. We are in sync, and we're able to have kind of making sure that those equity pieces are elevated and implemented with city leadership support. I've definitely got that written down. And definitely looking at the vendors or the individual either organizations or companies that the city of Bend chooses to work with. Thank you for that.
Also, it doesn't look like it has a messaging feature, so I was just going to mention I have to jump off probably about 10 minutes early.
Okay, thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, thanks for making time. Everyone, I know that it's really hard with schedules and work and family and all the good things to make time for this. I'm really appreciative of everyone coming together to be able to make this subcommittee work happen and get the ball rolling. So, Linda, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oops, no, I don't think so. I think I guess I'd do this. One of the most critical issues is the wider community's understanding of some of these problems, right? And I think what's needed is we got to change the conversation in the community. What I'm trying to say, right? I mean, we just have to change that conversation. We have to start asking some hard questions, and to the subcommunities, like, we have to ask some of these homeless, some of our homeless community members, what makes them think that is just their God-given right to live in the woods, and maybe find a different way to ask that, but you know what I mean. We have to start bringing up the idea of the common good and what is that and why was it written into our Constitution, and why should we pay attention to it today, right? And you know what, we have to start asking the hard questions to the other side of the community too, like the ones with the houses that don't want any kind of homeless camp supervisor not anywhere near them. Like, okay, well, you know what? Across the street and 2 blocks down is not your neighborhood, is not your backyard. It belongs to all of us, right? So, this the culture of NIMBYism in Bend is as bad as it was in Minneapolis in the 40s and 50s. So That I think is a really important place to not only start to stay, but to end with, because, you know, I really don't feel like forcing a person to change their mind works, either with, you know, tools around accountability, or with the tools around the law, or to just, you know, culture tools. Like, you know, we don't want to talk about that kind of idea, you know? So just I really think that this strange hanging on of this cultural um, um, reality in Bend, where, you know, the people who have want to keep it, it needs to be challenged.
So Linda, I'm hearing from you maybe something to do in the vein of community conversations and or educational opportunities to bring people together of differing viewpoints, potentially to expand our understanding and have more collective conversation, rather than just kind of lumping generalizations or the idea that you're sharing of not in my backyard. So
Yeah, absolutely. And we need some off the wall ways to do that. Like, you know, like actually doing a dating game kind of situation where we put 15 homeless behind a screen and get the community to ask some questions. Or a Monopoly game, like a Monopoly-like game, where we invite the community members of a neighborhood to sit in a big hall with lots of round tables, and we play a game. Where do you think we should put the homeless?
okay.
Where do you think we should, and start those conversations that are very difficult in a way that we can find commonalities.
Yeah. So in addition to the educational opportunities, really diving into non-traditional manners of communication. Joanne, I see that you have your hand up.
It was a mistake, sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. No problem. Let's see. Mo or Carolyn, do you have any other thoughts on any of these questions, or just generally anything to share? Okay. So same thing. So this is kind of the wrap up idea of, for this particular developing of an equity framework, open discussion for the subcommittee. Do we have questions? What are our next steps? What kind of research do we want to commit to undertaking? And then ultimately, what do we want to report out to the, the larger HREC meeting on March 29th this year? So any thoughts from any of this? Oh, Joanne, I see your hand now.
Yeah, I think that for the non-English speaking community, I think a real effort towards inclusion. I think that Linda was alluding to that as well. In a way that people are engaged as stakeholders, and that we move away from stereotypes, but rather ambition to discover who people are, right? Because everyone, every head's a universe. So I think that is something that is of definite interest, and I think that may fall more in like collaborative governance as opposed to equity framework, but maybe everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
And then just for the non-English speaking community, one thing that I think people need is just to have things in other languages besides English, so that people can participate. And as far as what does the community need, I think that what I and other community service providers or community advocates here is that folks, like leaders already know, they already know, like, they already know that things needs to be accessible in Spanish and it's still not accessible. So more transparency in timeframes, in budgets, in decision making. I think our reports are very colorful and attractive, but not necessarily give people a way to challenge power, right? To fully participate as stakeholders and maybe have a say in how we, direct our community. So yeah, that's where the two things that come to mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Joanne.
Linda?
So I sort of need to go back to my elephant and think about this a bite at a time. To that end, could we start with like an outline? Bunch of bullet points, or
Definitely.
I prefer an outline because in this context, for this kind of large, mind-bogglingly big, set of issues. So could we start with that outline and
Yeah.
get that outline done? Can we just could we, off the top of, this is an interesting exercise, off the top of our heads, could we chop that outline into how many are there of us? 4 or 5? Right here. If we
Yeah.
chopped it up into little buckets, like 4 or 5 different buckets of what would be included in this outline, and then each of us grab a bucket and try to write. And before we even do it that way, can we get an equity framework that's already written and take a look at the buckets that they're using? And I hate to, starting from absolute scratch doesn't seem like an efficient, some of these questions are so flippin' important and critical, we have to move on to them.
Yep.
So let's gather, is there a framework out there that we can start with?
Yeah, so great points, Linda. What I think, and I'm open to feedback with how we want to do this, but maybe providing a summary. I've been taking notes this time, and I know this particular meeting is recorded, so we can always return to it, but getting those big point notes that all of the commissioners have made, putting that into kind of a bullet point format of what we're looking at right now. And then I can include a few links to what we have as some equity frameworks available. And I'll just send that out to everyone. And if you want specifically to add things to an area or any area, you could just email me back directly so that we make sure that we're complying with public meetings and records laws. Does that sound okay for the group?
Yeah, that sounds good. I am interested in seeing if this is I think it might be a good idea, the first step, to actually do cut it into 4 different buckets if it's possible. And then divide ourselves into groups of 2 maybe, and then take that little section of the outline and really fill it out. And then I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to get a skeleton on paper so that we can.
I appreciate it, Linda, because I think really having clear idea of where we're going, which you have alluded to in many formats, whether it be, the blueprint or the roadmap or the outline, I'm totally on board with you. And if that's what other members want to do, commissioners, I'm happy to facilitate and be that go-between for commissioners. So definitely.
Have I mentioned that too many times?
No, I love it. I love all of it, all the different ways. But I think it truly will keep us on track and clear about and transparent, right? Also in terms of where we are, where we need to go, and what we're doing.
It's also the only way I can wrap my little head around this big thing.
It's a lot, yeah. These are the exact same questions, and this PowerPoint will be available online after our meeting a little bit later. But the same questions of the idea of operationalizing equity. I think that we hit all of the kind of points that we want to make. In just wrapping up, do we have anyone from the public that wanted to be available to make any kind of public comment?
Nope, she's gone.
Nope. Okay. Anybody in our last 4 minutes have any comments you want to make, any last thoughts? I have on my to-do list that I'm going to email kind of a rough bullet point framework of what we've discussed today. I'll also share the documentation when I receive that from Joanne regarding the management center. And then also I will provide, let's see, what else am I doing? Divide into 2 groups of 2. Oh yeah, maybe I'll see for Linda if there's groups of 2. Yeah, Joanne, go ahead.
I think another thing that will be useful thinking about different audiences. I think it's important to know what will be useful for our city manager and for our city council to have included within an equity framework for leveraging the resources that we already have. And I'm thinking, federally, statewide. I think it's important that there might be things that might be coming from their lens that we may not be aware, that may complement the ideas that come from this subcommittee.
That's great. Yeah. And really, if we want to look at when we're looking into the actual implementation of putting this in place, and there is the new equity director, maybe we could open up the subcommittee to meeting with more of the city staff to have a better idea of if what we're creating is implementable, if it's actionable, and if it's actually going to, make an impact, I think, to Mo's point, and how do we keep folks accountable for the information. Any other final thoughts? I want to be cognizant of your time. We've got 2 minutes left. Anybody else want to share anything or add anything? Jump in if you do. Yeah.
Thank you to all city staff. I think that there's a lot of people that have been doing work to change systems and culture and processes. And, we had it during COVID-19. We've had it with different proclamations and actions from our leaders. And, we're in a good path. So let's just, keep up the good work, because really, there's a lot that we can inspire other communities with the work we're doing. So it takes a team, and I appreciate, the community and the city staff that collaborate on this work.
Thanks, Joanne. Okay, if there are no further questions, it is 2:00. We will conclude this. And please keep an eye out for the email that I'll send to you either this evening or tomorrow first thing. And I'll look forward to seeing you all at our HREC meeting on March 29th at 4:30. So thank you all so much for your time and your commitment to ensuring you're equitable, inclusion minded, and putting that at the forefront of all things. So thank you so much. See you later.